Alright, so I'm going to be doing my economic analysis over South Africa. This is a pretty interesting time in South Africa's history as they are basically, a lot of people are predicting an economic collapse just due to a number of factors that I'll be touching on throughout the presentation. So South Africa has gone through pretty much two stages in history, in economic history, really. They've been under a more of a socialist economy, but not so much in a traditional sense because it was actually capitalists who were using segregation to control and divide the labor force. And when they were doing this, they were basically trying to exploit the poor white and black South Africans, the lower socioeconomic class. And since apartheid, it has changed over to a more market economy, primarily because a more open government has brought about relatively competitive investment and trade. And as they were facilitating this new sort of open system, it's not really completely took hold or gotten away from the old ways of doing things, as there still is a lot of state-owned enterprises, and they operate in several sectors of the economy. And there's a lot of non-transparent laws that continue to hinder private investment and foreign investment. So this impedes efficiency. But according to its economic freedom score, which I pulled off of Heritage organization website. In open markets, they rank 77% trade freedom, 45% investment freedom, and 60% financial freedom. So just a couple of notes there, just some extra data that I was able to find. So when looking up recessions for South Africa, there isn't really any data that I could find that indicated any other instances of recession, at least any credible sources. There's a few on Wikipedia that mentioned um, a depression after World War One, but I can't verify that source. But I just wanted to say this does not necessarily mean that there wasn't any. But what I did find was a South Africa GDP growth rate comparison from 96 to 2016. And you can see right around that time, 2008, I would say around 2009, South Africa suffered a recession. And so the Great Recession took place around the world during this time. So South Africa definitely was a country that was suffering as well. Um, it is worth noting, though, as I mentioned at the beginning, that a lot of economists are speculating in a collapse in South Africa in the coming future. So there's just lots of reasons for that. But definitely during that 2008 2010 period, you can see it was really struggling. So I just wanted to highlight, I guess the change in the economic system is pretty much the more drastic thing that might have happened during this country's history. So the changing of the economic system in South Africa is the most radical change overall in the history of the country, as it serves as a reminder of a time before the market was more open um, during the apartheid period. So this change was brought about primarily because of civil leaders such as Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, which took over shortly after 91 at the end of apartheid. And it has a little bit here about President Clerk. He eliminated um, just different groups, population registration acts, just things that were basically segregating blacks and whites during that time in South Africa, and basically adopting a constitutionalist sort of mentality to where it's guaranteeing equal rights. So similar to what we have here in the United States and um, Emancipation Proclamation and things of that nature. So kind of similar kind of feels, although it took on a lot later, is in the 90s. So yeah, just definitely very interesting history. And another thing, like I was talking about earlier in the economy, it was a socialist economy, but it was mainly just capitalists that were seeking to use and abuse the lesser people in society. And so, with that is just a general idea of this radical change that happened a lot because of social and political leaders and just people working towards changing this system that they saw was unjust and gave a lot of inequality amongst society as a whole. All right, so now that I've given you a little bit of history, it's time to get into the numbers. So we're going to be looking at a comparison between South Africa and the United States, basically from the time period of 2014 and to 2010. This drops back about 5 years. There wasn't any updated data on the data bank that I was able to pull, so 2014 is the most relevant, but there's definitely a couple of things that I'll highlight from 2015 that I was able to find from the World Factbook, the CIA website. But we can see here that GDP per capita in US dollars in 2014 varied between 7,592 and 20 cents dollars and $54,629.50. So definitely you can just see the mammoth GDP per capita in the U.S. and South Africa was a more poor third world like country. There's a lot of just a lot of people talking about just the unfairness of society, and there's also a personal income tax rate of 40%. So just a lot of general spending and public debt equals about 46% of annual domestic output. So as you can kind of see, it's very lopsided, upside and down sort of economy there. All right, so here's where we start to get into more the cause for concern as far as South Africa goes. You can see back in 2010, they were at a 3% GDP growth rate annually, and as of 2014, they have shrunk down to a 1.5% GDP growth rate. So they're definitely slowing down a lot, and I can only assume that in 2015 it slowed down quite significantly. And so, just in general, you can see that the U.S. has remained relatively consistent. They did have a brief while there in 2011 where they dropped down to 1.6, but it looks like they're rebounding in 2014 to 2.4%. So definitely just some major differences. And once again, like I was pointing out earlier, that 1.5%, I'm sure it's gone down significantly. It looks like in GDP, the real growth rate, once again, for 2015 was 1.4%, as I'm looking at my notes from the World Factbook. So for that 2015 estimate, it was 1.4%. So you can see it's still on a decline. All right, so we're taking a look now at CPI, and consumer prices and inflation and percentages. You can see the United States, as far back as 2014, we're seeing a 1.6% inflation rate, and in South Africa, a 6.4% inflation rate. So definitely just a lot of money probably being pumped into the economy there in South Africa. They also have a central bank, which tries to maintain a healthy inflation rate, but it looks like it's definitely countering that right now, and I'm sure it's probably only getting worse there, the inflation. So another sign there of some economic instability. All right, so we're taking a look at the unemployment rate, and I mean you can just see as far as 2014 that a mammoth 25% of the labor force is unemployed in South Africa. And this is, one of those things that's just really, it's unacceptable, and it's harming the society. I mean, you're just seeing a lot of just public civil unrest. A lot of people, there's a lot of crime in South Africa, just things are going wrong. And in most cases, I mean, you can kind of just look at the United States where it's a 6.2%. So, I mean, not saying that just because the unemployment's less, that any less crime would occur, but there's just generally a unwell state amongst, especially the young black youth in South Africa that make up a high rate of the unemployment statistic there. And it looks like back in 2010, the U.S. was facing a 9.7% unemployment rate, which was shortly after the Great Recession. So, I mean, it would be hard to imagine what it must feel like in South Africa as a quarter of your labor force is, unemployed. And looking at the statistics, in 2015, the labor force was at 20,860,000. So that was from 2015, and a quarter of those are, so roughly 5 million people there are unemployed. All right, so we're looking now at the fertility rate, life expectancy, mortality rate for, this is important, under 5 years old, and duration of compulsory education, which is just basically the stretch of how long they have to go to school, not necessarily the average years of schooling. I will be able to provide a single estimate of that for South Africa shortly after I look over these statistics. So first, South Africa's fertility rate, you can see that it's ranging anywhere from between 2.467 to 2.363, while the United States is actually on a decline for fertility rate. So I'm not really sure why that is, but I can kind of see that, just the way our environments are set up. I mean, either one could stand to guess at that. Life expectancy, only looking at 57 years old in South Africa compared to 78 in the US. So big difference there as far as how long you can be looking to last in South Africa. The mortality rate, you can look at the stats there, between 53 and 41 per 1,000, whereas it's 7.4 and 6.7. So just to give you a general idea, the actual death rate in South Africa is 9.91 deaths per 1,000 in the population. These were just for under 5. That was all I could pull from the data bank that I had available to me. And so yeah, the duration of the compulsory education, we're looking at 9 years required and 12 years, of course, here in the United States. But I did see that the school life expectancy for primary to tertiary education in total was about 14 years in South Africa. And this varied between males being 13 years and females being 14 years. And that stat was from 2012. So, yeah, just definitely a small gap between the two. I'm not really sure why females maybe have more incentive to go to school longer in South Africa. If it's as far as making a living for yourself, men have to go out sooner. But anyways, they're only looking at about 13 years of school. And so, talking about the country's natural resources, just wanted to share a fact here that South Africa is actually one of the largest mining there for gold and platinum. It looks like they have basically just have complete control over that market. It's one of their big commodities there is gold and platinum. They actually had a strike back in 2014, which slowed down that export. But yeah, a lot of just in general commodities, things like agricultural products or things that they like to import. But exports just being a lot of precious metals, things of that nature. And yeah, just very interesting that, they're looking to bring in a lot of agricultural products while, sending out the precious metals. And a lot of countries go for gold. In South Africa, there was actually, been movies about this to where, you know, diamonds, precious metals, gems, things of that nature. A lot of that all comes from Africa, and of course, there's a lot of crime that has to take place. A lot of people, bad people, get in charge of these mines and mining processes. So it's a pretty terrible thing, but nonetheless, South Africa does trade globally, and um, I didn't actually find any international agencies that the country was per se a member of. I will say that their political party there is the African National Congress, and they've pretty much dominated. They're on a parliament system there in South Africa. So they are the world's largest producers and exporters of gold and platinum, and that basically has been part of that open economy aspect. They trade that very, very prevalently. All right, so I'm coming to the end of my presentation. I hope I didn't leave too much out. Like I said, there's a few sources that I just had to kind of pull single items from because it was the only thing that was available, especially on this slide. But I definitely enjoyed learning more about South Africa and their economy and a little bit about their history, and just wanted to share that with you. And thank you very much.